pick and roll. So you agree with these picks or you feel like rolling to another? Let's start with John Morant. He is your best guard option tonight. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, he's certainly a good option. I don't know if he's the best option. I'm a little worried about this matchup against Denver, which has actually been the second best defense in the league so far. And we'll see if that holds up over the course of the season, but it's not really an ideal matchup for John Morant. With that said, he's been so good lately that he's almost already reached that point where you don't really worry all that much about the matchup. So certainly a justifiable option for your lineups tonight. I think I'd maybe slightly prefer Trae Young at point guard at 9,300. He goes up against the Washington Wizards. Even LaMelo Ball at 8,500. He's been a little bit up and down these first couple of weeks, but coming off of a 52.3 DraftKings point game against Portland on Sunday, saving the money, taking him at 8,500 in a good matchup against the Cavs. To me, that's probably my favorite point guard play tonight.
Okay, what's your favorite point guard play tonight, Matt? Is it John Morant?
So I'm with Nick, actually. I think Trae Young, point per dollar, is probably the better option. I do think Morant will be pretty contrarian pick tonight with not the best matchup there against Denver. So for a GPP pick, I think he actually could be a good choice. But ultimately, this is not a slate, at least at the time we're talking, where there's a lot of cheap players who look underpriced. So this probably just isn't a slate where you want to pay up for too many guys in general and go into some guys in the 5, 6, or 7K range, maybe like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at point guard. I think I prefer picks like that where you go with a little more of a balanced lineup because and then as soon as we're done talking, this always happens. Some injury news will break, and then John Morant will look a lot better. But as of now, I think that just going cheaper at all positions kind of makes more sense.
Yeah, further reminder, make sure you guys and gals are following DK Live on Twitter because they're always, the whole squad is always tweeting the latest up-to-date updates when it comes to injuries and news around the league. Maddie, you picking Sabonis or Randall tonight, or do you want to roll with someone else for a top forward play?
So I think it's the same problem that Morant has where Sabonis and Randall both could have really good games, but they're just a little too expensive. And at forward in particular, I think there actually are a lot of guys in the mid-range. So my favorite forward on this slate is probably someone like Michael Porter Jr., Jaren Jackson. We did get one piece of news today that Scotty Barnes is doubtful for the Raptors. So that could open up minutes for Chris Boucher, maybe someone like that. So I know it's a little bit of a cop-out not to pick an expensive forward, but I just think there are a lot of forwards in the mid-tier who look really, really good. So I'm going to those guys instead.
Mr. Whalen, how about you, dude?
Yeah, I feel mostly the same way. Like Matt said, it's like you're never going to sit there and say, like, there's no chance Sabonis or Randall have big games tonight. But I think there are maybe wiser ways to spend that money. If I had to choose between those two, however, I think I would lean Randall. Seems like he's in a good spot to potentially bounce back. 3 straight games under 17 points for Julius Randle, which is basically unheard of for him since the start of last season. But he still provides you with such a high floor with the rebounding. He's still been handing out a ton of assists, even though the scoring hasn't been there over those last few games. I think Miles Bridges at 7,900 is still a pretty decent deal. His price is up, almost $1,000 since the start of the year, but he's been worth it pretty much every single night. It hasn't slowed down at all. And another name, in that Raptors game with Scotty Barnes likely out for this one, OG Anunoby at 7,400. Even with Barnes in the lineup the last few games, he's been playing a ton of minutes, up close to 40 per game. I don't think that changes tonight. So you could look to Chris Boucher, like Matt said. You could even maybe look to Khem Birch, who probably picks up some minutes. Precious Achiuwa's playing time has been down a little bit these last couple of games anyway. So that Raptors game, I think, is the area to target for value at the forward spot.
Hey, Nick, is Jason Tatum the top pick in the Celtics-Bulls matchup?
I think he has to be. He's had some weirdly inefficient shooting nights this season. He's one of his last 13 from 3 over these last 2 games. He, of course, had that 2 of 15 disaster from 3 on opening night. But I think he's still Boston's highest upside player on almost every single night. Jaylen Brown has had his games as well this season, but Tatum's floor, I think, is quite a bit higher night to night. If you look at the other side of this matchup, like Zach LaVine, I think has looked okay. He's playing through that torn ligament in his hand. He's been, good, not great in his last 2 games. You do wonder, how much that bothers him. So even if you think LaVine versus Tatum is somewhat comparable, I think the fact that LaVine is continuing to play through an issue on his dominant shooting hand, maybe that breaks the tie for me. So I'm willing to pay the $900 more and go Tatum over LaVine.
9-game slate tonight. It's Tatum the top pick in this game, Matt.
I think he's certainly right up there. I think there could be a case for Nikola Vucevic if you think that because Levine is playing a little bit hurt, maybe he just doesn't shoot quite as much as he normally does. And I think we could see some of that offense funneled more towards Vucevic, towards DeRozan, towards Lonzo Ball. I still think it probably is Tatum. This is a game, though, even though the total is pretty reasonable, up near 220, there are a lot of players to score on both teams, and both teams are pretty healthy right now. So I don't really love anyone. It's almost like Tatum is the least bad option. As far as like the big upside game, I think he is the most likely there. The player I like the most from the game overall is probably Al Horford. I just think he's the most reliable asset for either team. But as far as putting up a big game, I think Tatum is the guy.
Matt, Trae Young or Bradley Beal in this Hawks-Wizards game to have a better DFS night?
I think it's most likely to be Trae Young. He's also cheaper, so he probably does make for the better play. But I do think less people will have Bradley Beal. So this is going to kind of depend what contest you're playing and what your goal is there. Because I think Beal at 10K compared to Trae at 9,300, it's just like Trae's easier to fit. And this is a night where we're probably going to have a bit of a salary crunch where I don't think a lot of people are playing Bradley Beal. And the Wizards defensively are not as good as the Hawks either. So my pick is most likely Trae, but I actually think I prefer Beal for tournaments.
Which one do you roll with, Nick?
This is a tough call. I'd like them both, but I would lean toward Bradley Beal. He's got 51 and 59 DraftKings points over his last two games. He's got 58 field goal attempts and 13 free throws in that span. He leads the league in usage rate in the early going, up over 35%, which is crazy high, especially for a non-point guard. And then you look at Trae Young. I mean, his scoring has slowed down a little bit of late. He had those back-to-back 30-point games, kind of right around the 1 week mark, but scoring's been down lately. The assists have been great. That provides him a nice floor, but he doesn't really rebound at all, not nearly at the rate of Beal. And the three-point shooting, really for the last year and a half now, has come and gone for Trae Young. I think you still think of him as this like Steph Curry type of player, but he has no more than 2 made threes in any game this season. Really since the start of last year, he's cut down on the three-point rate. He's been getting to the line more. And obviously he's one of a handful of players who are still adjusting to the way that the league has adjusted its officiating this season. So long term, I think Trae Young is obviously going to be fine, but just for tonight's slate, I think I do prefer Beal.
Let's go over to the DK Sportsbook here, Nick. Lowest, what do we have? 208.5? Okay, sounds good. So lowest game total on the board now is Toronto, New York at 208.5. Knicks averaging 117. Raptors at 103. You picking that total as your favorite tonight, Nick?
It's tough to say. I mean, like you said, it's already down 2.5 points overnight since when we first started looking at it on Sunday night. So, the money is coming in on this under. The Knicks are 7-point favorites in this game. So the implied total for Toronto is about 100, 101 points. Not expecting a whole lot from that Raptors offense. These are two bottom 5 teams in pace. But despite that, the Knicks are number 2 in the league in scoring in terms of points per game, behind only the Charlotte Hornets. So they've been super efficient. They're shooting 41% from 3 as a team in the early going. Obviously, that's not super sustainable. If I had to make a pick on this total, I think I would go over. I think the Knicks can get into the 110s, maybe even the low 120s if that shooting holds up. I think Toronto probably comes in right around 100 to 105 points. This total has just sunk a little too low for me to go with the under.
Matt, is this your favorite total tonight, or you got another one?
So this one's a little hard to read because we have this Scotty Barnes news, and I think that is why the total has dropped already. It's going to be interesting to see what the Raptors do as far as their lineup, because I think there's a chance that we see them play a much bigger lineup than what they normally play with someone like Khem Birch, who we mentioned before, or Chris Boucher. And then the game just slows down a ton. And then we see a game where there's less than 200 points, because I think the Knicks are playing a little over their heads as far as offense. Their stats are also boosted by the fact that they played a double overtime game already this year. So I actually am leaning under here, but I'm kind of just interested in what the starting lineup will be for the Raptors, and then I can have more concrete of a take. But I actually think it is right that the total's been dropping here.
Celtics are not off to a hot start. In fact, they really are addicted to overtime, even double overtime through like 6 games. Bulls are 5-1 though. So Boston is at home, now favored by 2, down from 2.5. You like the Bulls in this one, or are you rolling to another game as your favorite spread to bet tonight, Matt?
So I promise I'm not just doing this to pander to the Boston fans in the house.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I actually think I think the Celtics are the best bet on the board tonight.
Wow.
Not the Bulls, who are off to this hot start. I think part of the reason that this line is still too low at Celtics -2 is because the Bulls have won so many games to start out the year. But we talked about already, Zach LaVine may not be 100%. Patrick Williams is now out for the Bulls, and I think he's probably the guy who would have spent the most time guarding Jason Tatum. The Bulls don't really have another player, I think, who can really slow him down. He's kind of it as far as at least like bigger wing defenders. They can use Alex Caruso probably on Jaylen Brown, but for Tatum, I think Williams was the guy there. And then I think this is right. The Celtics haven't played a game yet this year with all of their players healthy. We had Marcus Smart was sick. Robert Williams was also sick. Al Horford rested, or I think had COVID the first game of the season. Jaylen Brown has missed a game. Tonight should be, if it's not the first, it's one of the first times where the Celtics actually have their full roster intact. And this is a really deep team. I think the Celtics bench is a lot better than the Bulls, and they're at home. So, like, to me, Boston is the better team. They just haven't played like it. They haven't been fully healthy. This could be the game where they finally have it all start to come together. I'm sure that more of the bets and the handle and all of that are on the Chicago side. Just if you look at the records, the Bulls should probably win. But I think ultimately the Celtics wind up being the better team this year, and they're at home, so I think they cover.
Yeah, the Green Teamers an even keel and fair fan base, many demanding that Ime Udoka already be fired through 6 games. Matt's calling this the best bet tonight, his best bet. Nick, what are you calling it?
I wouldn't call it my best bet, but I do agree with Matt that I like Boston to win this game. And the spread is down to Boston -1.5. So I think that's a pretty smart play. Chicago is 5-1, but they haven't really played anybody. They played a good team in the Knicks. They lost that game. That they tried to give away that game to Toronto over the weekend, ended up pulling out the win. But like Matt alluded to, I think they're really going to miss Patrick Williams. Like, this is a team that, unlike Boston, is very top heavy and very reliant on its top 3 or 4 guys. They let Lauri Markkanen go this offseason. They have very, very little depth in the front court, especially. I mean, now it's Derek Jones. It's some guy named Marko Simonovic. It might be Alize Johnson. I mean, those minutes have to go somewhere. And they don't really have a true replacement for essentially a defensive specialist in Patrick Williams. So I think they're going to feel that loss quite a bit, and perhaps that starts tonight against Boston. The game I really had my eye on, though, is Minnesota-Orlando. Wolves are favored by 9 in this one. It is a big number. I know we are talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves after all, but I think this could be a get-right game for that Minnesota offense, but just hasn't really looked all that good so far. Ironically, Minnesota's been really good on defense. Orlando has the worst defense in the entire league, second worst net rating in the league, behind only OKC. They turn the ball over a ton. They don't force a lot of turnovers. I like a lot of the individual pieces in Orlando. I think they have a nice thing going for the future, but I think this is a spot where Minnesota wins, in kind of a blowout fashion.